Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest webinar from OMDIA. Today's topic is 5G impact on the economy, employment, and emissions in 2030. Our webinar is co-sponsored by OMDIA and our partner Orange. My name is Mike Roberts, Principal Consultant in the Service Provider Group at OMDIA, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to be introducing our other speaker shortly, but before that, I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets, which you can use. Make sure that you check these out during the webinar. A copy of today's slide deck and other resources will be available in the resource list widget. If you want to join us on Twitter, just click on that tool and follow us using the hashtag 5G. If you have questions during the webinar, you can submit them through the Q&A widget located on the left side of your screen. All questions will be captured, so if we don't have a chance to answer it live, we can try to follow up with you by email. An on-demand version of this webinar will be available in approximately 24 hours after we finish, and can be accessed using the same audience link that we sent you earlier. And finally, if you have any technical difficulties, just click on the Help widget where you can find answers to some common questions. So that does it for the housekeeping. Now I would like to introduce our guest speaker. Today I'm joined by Karine Dussert-Sart, the Executive Vice President at Orange Innovation in Marketing and Design. Welcome, Karine.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
And thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to you and Orange for sponsoring the webinar and commissioning the 5G impact research. So the way we're going to run today is we're going to have Karine is going to say a few words, and then we're going to get into the 5G impact research. Yep. So Karine, you just wanted to ask why you decided to sponsor this study.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Mike. So first of all, so Orange, just a little reminder, we are one of the world's, European leading telecommunications service provider. We're present in 26 countries, and we serve more than 360 million customers. One of our goals is obviously to unlock value through innovation. So what is value? Is value for Orange, is value for citizens, is value for society, and it's value for the industries and businesses as a whole. We think that we can unlock value from our networks to simplify and enrich users' lives, but also to contribute to economic development, job creation, as well as carbon emission reduction objectives. So first, before answering your question, Mike, why 5G is important? We could discuss hours on this, so I'll keep it short. When rolled out, 5G networks everywhere in the world will complement existing networks. They will enable operators to address demand growth, and I say tremendous growth for our networks, with a more efficient network, and it's something that is super important to have in mind. We will be able to deliver average speeds, around 1 to 10 compared to 4G. Currently, it's more 1 to 4, and we will offer better connection, especially in dense areas, economic hubs, dense urban areas. What is quite interesting is when we ask our customers today that are on 5G, 90% of them say that today our current 5G meet or exceed their expectation. It's mainly faster internet on the go, and we know that these expectations grow with usage growth. So we're quite satisfied with these numbers, because the rollout has been only very recently in some geographies in Europe for Orange. We also believe that 5G will pave the way for new immersive mobile experiences. Virtual reality could take place only on 5G in a mobility situation. It will be accessible for everyday communication, but also work, education, entertainment. So we also project ourselves, you know, above and beyond. When the 5G network will be on a standalone basis, then it will be even more efficient in terms of latency. It will allow us to dedicate certain, you know, parts of the network, dedicate them to several type of use cases. It could be industry, it could be the health, it could be, you know, any other specific needs like smart cities. So we really think that 5G will be a game changer. We also think, which is one of the reasons why we made the study, that there is a lot of groundwork to do. We don't think it's going to happen by a blink of an eye. We think that it's also our role, Orange, as a main player in this economy, in this industry. We have a responsibility to educate, to make that education accessible to every economic player for free. It's, you know, for you to take, because it's for us to build together. So we really think that strongly there is value to unlock, but to do that, we need expertise, we need to explain, and we need to have a goal together to project ourselves, you know, we service providers, but also all the different businesses that can be impacted. And that's why we say, and I will come back probably at the conclusion, we say at Orange that the most innovative thing about 5G is what we will do with it. And we say that for a reason, because we strongly believe that there is groundwork to do. The we is the we service provider plus the others, meaning the industries, the citizens, the consumers. And it's all together that we believe that innovation will come through. So that's why we've commissioned a study from OMDIA, because we wanted to have a dedicated piece of work in the geographies that correspond to where we are in terms of Europe and 5G. So France, Belgium, Romania, Poland, Slovakia has just been added, and Romania. So all of these countries, we've commissioned OMDIA, a world leader research firm, to help us to understand three things: the economic value of the 5G, the impact on job creation, because impact on society means, you know, looking after, you know, employment and looking at it. And the third one, which we believed, especially in this world where we have so much challenge in terms of transition to a more ecological and a more environmental friendly world, impact on carbon emission. So this study gathers these three impacts, and with that, now with this in mind, Mike Roberts will share with you some of the results today, and after we'll open for a Q&A. Thank you for your attention so far.
Great, Corinne. Thank you so much for that introduction and for you know, supporting the research and you know, helping to move 5G forward in Europe and the world. So now I'm going to go ahead and just provide some of the detail on the research. We can't cover everything in the time we have, but we'd like to give you as good a indication as we can. And starting with the methodology for the research, and I'll take a little bit more time on these slides than I will on others, just because this is quite key to understanding how we conducted and set up the research. And essentially, it's important to say something that's not on this slide, which is, you know, we looked at the impact of 5G across the economy, you know, generally speaking, on these countries, the economies, on jobs, and on greenhouse gas emissions. So it's looking very broadly at how 5G will roll out and impact, you know, not just communications, but also all the other industries that will use 5G to increase sales potentially, to enable jobs, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the details and the methodology, and I won't take, you know, too long on this. You know, we start with 5G forecast. We have extensive 5G forecasts in all the countries we were studying. That's sort of one key piece, you know, how 5G will be deployed in each of these countries out to 2030. Another key part is, you know, socioeconomic forecasts. These are much larger scale forecasts that we have access to as well, that look at how these economies will look in 2030. That includes forecasts for total sales by industry in each country, what the employment base will look like in each country in 2030. Again, that is segmented by industry. And we also have forecasts that actually the countries themselves provide as part of their international commitments on greenhouse gas emissions. And these forecasts are countries forecasting what their greenhouse gas emissions will be in 2030 by industry. So those are the sort of baselines that we have developed and started with. And then we move on to really look at, what will be the detailed impact of 5G in each country, in each industry in 2030. And of course, that's quite a large exercise. So to make it manageable, we split and segment 5G into 21 particular 5G use cases, which I'll show you shortly. And also, the country's economies, we look at down a level at 16 industries representing the vast majority of economic activity in each country. And the number of industries we look at for the emissions forecast was somewhat fewer and a little different, just because emissions are sort of accounted for a little differently than industry sales and employment. And then we go through a modeling and validation exercise and really arrive at what we'll be sharing with you in the slides that follow, forecasts for the impact of 5G in 2030 in each country, as Karine mentioned, across three main categories: economic impact, 5G-enabled sales, 5G-enabled employment or jobs by country, and 5G-enabled greenhouse gas emissions that we can avoid in each country, through the use of 5G. So not quite as much time here to just, provide the detail of what I ran you through a second ago. You can see the 5G use cases we defined. We defined 21 of them, across all the three major use case categories: enhanced mobile broadband, massive Internet of Things, and mission critical services. You can see the use cases detailed there. I won't run through them. And again, we just wanted to provide the detail on the industry segmentation we used. It's a standard industry segmentation. Again, we had forecasts for sales and employment by these industries out to 2030 in each country, and therefore had to assess the level of deployment and impact of each of the 21 5G use cases you see there in each of these industries in each country out to 2030. So that's it for the methodology of the research. And just to give our audience a chance to participate throughout the presentation, we're going to ask you a few questions. This is really just your own views. And the first question we'd like to ask you is, what do you think will be the biggest positive impact of 5G in your own market by 2030? And we've given you three choices. These correspond to the areas we looked at in the 5 countries Karine mentioned. One is enabling industry sales, 2 is supporting employment, and the third is helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So if you'd like to go ahead and make your selection, we'll give you just a few seconds to do that. I see the number of submissions climbing, which is good. I'll read them one more time as people get the hang of this, and then we'll move on. What do you think will be the biggest positive impact of 5G in your market by 2030? Enabling industry sales, supporting employment, helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so I see a lot more of you have submitted your view. Thank you very much for that. And we will now go on. Wow, we have a clear winner here, Karine, don't we? Enabling industry sales. 74% of you felt that was the biggest positive impact, followed by helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 16%, and 10% supporting employment. So clearly, seeing 5G have a bigger impact, on the commercial side, which is understandable, I guess, by enabling industry sales. Karine, what are your thoughts on those results?
Well, I think that probably the audience know a bit about 5G, and they probably, have a unconscious or conscious bias towards the first category, also because
Yep.
they know it a bit more. So, but that's quite interesting, and interesting that the second one is greenhouse gas emissions. So, I wouldn't have bet that the audience would have said so. I would have bet 1, 2, 3, not 1, 3,
Yeah.
2.
I agree. No, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I would agree with you. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all in business. I mean, industry sales is obviously a big focus for all of us. I do think that the other impacts of 5G, supporting employment and reducing greenhouse gas emissions aren't as well known, but I would guess that they will become better known over time. Great. Thank you, audience, for your views. We'll be asking you a few more questions through the presentation if you'd like to get ready. And thank you, Karine, for your thoughts on that. So I'll move on. And just going to look at some of the results of the study. We outlined the methodology. We'll provide some of the results, which will hopefully be of interest. And this is the kind of the headline, really. Initially we looked at the 5G impact in 2030 across these 5 countries. As Karine mentioned, France, Spain, Poland, Belgium, and Romania. We did look at Slovakia a little later as well, so that won't be in this first section. We'll provide you those details later on when we have more of a country view. But you can see the sort of total results of 5G impact across all 5 countries in 2030. 5G will enable 407 billion euros in sales. It will enable more than 1 million jobs across the 5 countries. And it will help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 33 million tons of CO2 equivalent gases. Clearly, a very substantial impact across the board, across all 3 segments in 2030. So now I'm going to go down sort of a level and look at the impacts in a little more detail in each segment. First, we're going to look at economic impact. And the model we developed, which I ran you through very briefly, really looked at first the level of adoption of the 21 5G use cases that I detailed earlier across all the industries that we listed out in 2030 in each of the 5 countries. So clearly there's first, how widely adopted will these use cases be? Some of them will not be, adopted really at all in some of the countries, in some of the industries in that time frame. Some, of course, will see very broad and wide adoption. And so there's a real range of level of adoption when you get down to the use case level. And then the kind of next exercise was, what will the economic impact of each of these use cases be in each industry, in each country? So that's the methodology again. And the drivers of the adoption, as many of you will know in the audience, how soon 5G is deployed, what spectrum it's deployed in, how quickly we and others see it being deployed in a country. When will it reach mass adoption? Clearly by 2030, there'll be mass consumer adoption of 5G in all the countries. In some of the enterprise segments, it will be a little bit more mixed. Another key factor is what's the adoption of the previous cellular technologies, whether that be 4G or whether that be IoT technologies. And those are, essentially providing competition for 5G. Clearly, businesses and even consumers are going to have to see a compelling reason to move to 5G relative to current technologies. And then just a quick note about what 5G-enabled sales represent. It's really the overall annual revenue from sales of all public and private entities, enterprises in the private area, within an industry, and that includes sales, throughout the value chain, not just the, to end users, which is kind of where GDP focuses, but through all the intermediate, producers as well. So it is a broad categorization, and really this is what we felt would be the best approach for, finding 5G enabled sales in 2030. And you can see the results by country. This clearly has a lot to do with the size of the country and its economy, but it also has to do with how quickly 5G will be adopted and in what industries and in which use cases. And you can see the levels there by country. I won't read those out. I did just want to provide a little context that 5G enabled sales, this 407 billion euros, yes, it's a very big number, but yes, these economies are also far bigger than that. And that 407 billion will represent 3.3% of the total sales, total industry sales in all 5 countries in 2030. Just to put it in context that yes, it's a big number, but in terms of overall sales, it's actually, relatively modest. It's not modest for the impact of one technology on an economy, but it is modest in terms of, the scale of these overall economies we were looking at. And I also just wanted to provide a view of how these 5G enabled sales, again, across all 5 of the countries we looked at initially, break down by industry. You can see manufacturing is, by far the largest industry. Again, that has to do with, a number of factors. Some of the main ones being manufacturing is a very large industry to begin with in many of these countries, particularly France, the others as well. But also the level of adoption and level of impact of 5G in manufacturing by 2030, we see to be very significant. You're already seeing, a lot of trials and even deployments of 5G in the manufacturing segment today, and we see that really accelerating over the time span of this research. You can see a lot of the other categories, again, significant 5G-enabled industry sales. Manufacturing may be the top, but wholesale and retail trade, also very significant, followed by information and communication and public service and defense. So now switching gears a little from the economic impact to the employment impact. Again, that came third in our poll, so hopefully a little bit here I can share with you, you may or may not have heard before. But the net impact on employment from 5G, it will be positive overall, our research found, but clearly there's pluses and minuses. Automation, technology in general can lead to job losses, whether that be through things like remote monitoring, digitization of customer interaction, and so on. However, we do really see opportunities for job enablement by 5G. This includes really a whole new, kind of class of jobs that will be more supported by technology than previously. We actually see 5G driving a paradigm shift in the impact of wireless on employment across industries. You could generalize and say that, previous technology generations have really helped, the roles of white-collar workers, desk-based workers, clearly to some degree other workers as well, but we see 5G as it moves into smart factories, into smart cities, really helping, enable more blue-collar kind of cognitive physical jobs, including, for example, skilled technicians installing new devices, components, and systems across a range of industries, to help increase sales and potentially reduce emissions. So we do see 5G kind of opening the door to technology, improving the roles and enabling employment in new segments of the economy as it drives wireless into new segments of the economy. And with that, another poll question. Again, this is about your market, so I'd say, you probably, well, I'm sure you know more about your market than we do, but it's really your view of, in your market, in which industry do you expect 5G to support the most employment in 2030? And again, I would ask you to go ahead and submit your views here on your screen. The choices are information and communication, that industry, public service and defense. The third option is utilities, then transportation and storage, and the final option, financial and insurance. And again, just to give you a chance to have time to respond, I'll read the question again. In which industry do you expect 5G to support the most employment in your market in 2030? And obviously, this is just your view. It's a little bit of a challenging question, given that's almost 10 years out. But obviously, that's the topic we're looking at. So we wanted to get your views as part of our session. So I see the numbers climbing, which is fantastic. I appreciate your input on the question. And we will now go ahead and look at the results. Thank you again. So we have information and communication coming out on top with 57% of our audience members who responded, seeing that as supporting the most employment by 5G enabled employment in 2030, followed by transportation and storage. Then we have utilities, followed by public service and defense, and poor financial and insurance didn't get any choices. So that is interesting. And I would say an initial thought is, information and communication is definitely high up on the list of what we found as well. You'll see that shortly. I think we had it at number 2. We did have public service and defense really is number 1. Again, across these countries, it's going to vary by market. So this might be the right answer in your markets. But it's interesting. It shows that we could see differences by country, based on, how people see this developing in the industries in their own countries. Karine, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would have thought that transportation, from the audience would be maybe a bit higher. It's number 2, but by far, from number 1. And so I'm slightly disappointed because we know we have a lot of use cases already up and running, different ports in Europe. So transportation is definitely something, a use case, and that, there's a lot of work going on. So anyway, I would have guessed that this would have come up higher.
No, that's interesting. And again, it's kind of hard to project this out to 2030. I know you all have a lot of activity across a number of these segments, but I think it's really interesting. And again, I guess we all kind of work in the information and communication segment in a way, so that may tilt us a little bit towards that as well. So thank you again for your input from the audience and Karine on that. I think we maybe got one more question for you coming up in a bit. And I did just want to first give you a country view of the 5G-enabled employment in 2030. This is breaking down the 1.03 million figure to the country level. Again, you see, clearly this is related to the size of the employment base in these countries. Clearly, 5G will evolve at a different pace and will have a different level of impact on employment in different industries in different countries. But this is the kind of, the summary of the level of 5G enabled jobs by country in 2030. And again, we wanted to put it into context because obviously it's a big number, but these over 1 million 5G enabled jobs in 2030, that represents 1.3% of total projected jobs in 2030 across the 5 countries. So again, it's a big number. But, when you put it into the context of overall employment, it's not massive in terms of percentage. I mean, clearly, I think you could argue that, a digital technology creating jobs at all as opposed to potentially not creating jobs is significant, and certainly significant at this scale. And also just wanted to provide a view by industry. Again, this, first of all, we asked you about your own market, and you could very well be in different markets for what we're looking at here. That could explain the difference in, your views and what we found. And I think another thing that we found that actually surprised us in the research was, 5G will have an impact in areas like public service and defense. First, by virtue of the fact that these are, massive segments for employment, and even just, small impacts, small progress by technologies like 5G, can lead to a lot of impact in employment just by the sheer number of people, working in these segments. And then the other aspect is, clearly, as the audience felt, segments like information and communication are just, not only include 5G, but are also, natural allies, as it were, for digital technologies to create new jobs by using and deploying these technologies to, bring benefits to other industries. So that helps to explain some of the industry segmentation that we found in the research that you see here. So now we wanted to go on and look at the third major area, and that is 5G's impact on greenhouse gas emissions. How will 5G help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2030? And I wanted to to raise one thing that's not on the slide, sort of for context, but there's clearly the direct emissions of the mobile segment itself. In this case, 5G is what we're looking at. But previous research and even government data has shown that the direct emissions of the mobile segment, even of the broader information and communication segment, is a very small percentage of overall greenhouse gas emissions. For example, in France in 2018, the information and communication segment accounted for less than 1% of France's total greenhouse gas emissions. So what I'm getting at by mentioning this is that the segment itself, of course, has emissions, but the emissions it helps to reduce by other industries using 5G, smartphones, smart factories, smart cities, greatly outweighs the direct emissions of 5G itself. That's what we found in the research, and we found this really across the consumer and enterprise segments. Clearly, we're going to see 4G smartphones evolve to 5G smartphones. Some of the savings in emissions you get by essentially using your phone rather than driving your car, and think of the same in enterprises and a larger scale, will help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 across the segments. Of course, there's whole new categories that 5G enables in massive IoT and mission critical services that just kind of amplifies and extends this effect throughout these economies. And again, providing the country view, the country segmentation, as it were, of this headline number of 33 million tons of CO2 equivalent reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 2030. Again, largely but not entirely ordered by size of the economy, but really existing emissions. You can see Poland probably punches above its weight there, really because it is, going to be making a fairly significant transition toward renewable energy, and 5G will have a role to play there in helping reduce emissions there. Again, the overall context, 5G-enabled avoided emissions, again, a large number, 33 million tons. But that will just represent 2.4% of total greenhouse gas emissions these countries are projecting they will have in 2030. So, we're not saying it's going to revolutionize greenhouse gas emissions in these economies, but we are saying for a single technology, it's going to have a significant positive impact by 2030 across these 5 countries. And by industry, you can see what the impact will be across the 5 countries. This is the order we saw. I see that our poll question on this is actually coming afterwards. So what I'm going to do is skip past that quickly. Provided a sneak preview of what we found in the research. Again, in these 5 countries, you may very well be based in a different country. You may have a different view. We wanted to ask another question of our audience, so get ready to put your answers down. In your market, which industry do you think will see the largest 5G-enabled reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 2030? So the choices are transport. You can go ahead and start putting in your answers. Energy industries, manufacturing, construction, and industrial processes, buildings and other is really quite a sort of a catch-all category. If you think essentially about smart buildings for that segment, agriculture, how can 5G help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the agriculture segment, and the sort of waste and waste management segment. So again, which industry do you think will see the largest 5G-enabled reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 in your market, wherever you may be based? So I see the results coming in. Thank you very much for that. So we'll give you just a few more seconds. Oh, the number jumped quite a lot there. Thank you for that. And here's the responses. Well, maybe I'm not sure if it's related to us showing the results of our research first in this case, but whether it was or not, transport comes out on top. 51% of our audience members who responded think that will be the industry that sees the largest 5G-enabled reduction in greenhouse gases emissions in 2030, followed by manufacturing, interesting, and then energy industries, buildings, agriculture, and waste. So that's interesting. That lines up, pretty well with our research. Kareem, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, my thoughts are it's pretty difficult to comment on that one. I guess transportation is more than half here. And again, if I look at what we are doing in different countries, especially we have something right now that we are rolling out in Romania regarding trucks and how 5G can help to save money, but also obviously because it will be less transport impact on green gas emissions. So that kind of rings a bell for me. Apart from that, nothing in particular that I would like to comment. I think maybe agriculture is something also that there's more and more, and I'll talk maybe after, but there's more and more questions that are interested into smart agriculture. We know that by fine-tuning, the amount of energy that we're putting into the agriculture, we will be able to, and 5G will be an enabler for that. We will be probably, that will be probably a big use case that maybe we don't think at first. So definitely it's only 8% here, but it's probably bigger in reality.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting, and I agree. And I'll go back and just show you again. Every market is different, and Karine, obviously, what's happening now is quite early and is going to evolve differently in these different markets. But we did, like the audience, find transport to be the top impact, followed by energy industries, manufacturing, building, agriculture, and waste. So now I'm going to go on to just a few minutes on, at the country level. We won't take too long on this because we obviously want to have some time for your questions. And I would say, just as a reminder, feel free to submit questions into the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can in a few minutes when we open to questions. So really, I mentioned that, we looked at Slovakia after the initial 5 countries, but really found similar results in that, quite substantial impact across the 3 segments in Slovakia in 2030. The headline numbers there were 9 billion euro in 5G enabled sales in Slovakia in 2030, 34,000 5G enabled jobs, and 0.8 million tons of CO2 equivalent 5G enabled avoided emissions. The headline numbers aren't maybe as big as some of the other countries just by virtue of the fact, it's a smaller economy, but in percent terms, certainly just as significant, really, across the board. And so moving on, again, we looked in detail, of course, at each country in the study. We don't have time to go to share all the detail, but you can see the impact of 5G in France in 2030. You see the headline numbers there: 190 billion euros in 5G enabled sales, 422,000 5G enabled jobs, and 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Many segments of the economy clearly impacted by 5G, as it will be across all the countries. We did look at, smart manufacturing, really industrial automation in France. Karine, I think, mentioned there's already activity that Orange and others are involved with there. France has a very large manufacturing segment, and really that's going to be, a significant impact that 5G will have in France, also in other countries, but it'll kind of punch above its weight in France due to the really early adoption and also scale of manufacturing and scale of potential benefits 5G can bring to manufacturing in France. Again, a quick look at the research in Poland. I won't go through the headline numbers, which you see there, but something interesting in Poland was really the impact 5G will have on, smart energy and the smart grid. This is kind of, maybe something that comes a bit later because it's in mission critical services, which is, kind of the last 5G use case category to develop based on when the technology will be ready. But really significant impact in Poland because they have ambition goals to transform coal coal-based energy to renewable based energy in the country. And we really see 5G by enabling smart energy and smart grids to be able to play a key role in that, which helps to explain why we forecast there will be 9 million tons of CO2 equivalent reductions in greenhouse gas emissions enabled by 5G in Poland in 2030. And Belgium, I would just highlight that you see the headline numbers, again, impact across all three areas. And it was interesting to look at the impact in Belgium of asset tracking. Already asset tracking is a huge segment in Internet of Things. And something we found there was that 5G will have an impact, but it does face significant competition from existing entrenched technologies supporting asset tracking. So that's an example of where, a use case will be very widely adopted, but 5G will only be in the, X% of it due to competition from other technologies. And that is it from the research itself. I wanted to now hand back to Karine, who has a call to action on 5G. So Karine, over to you.
Yes, sure. So thank you, Mike. So to conclude this session, I would like to mention a few things. So, well, first of all, Orange, we are convinced that digital technologies, and 5G is one of them, are technologies that can bring solutions to help tackling our environmental challenges and care for our planet. We also, I think, and there were a few questions that I've seen, but it's also important to look at our own impact, of course, and how these technologies, impact themselves, especially the greenhouse emission. And this is a key topic for Orange. We're not, saying it's not a key topic because we have also an ambitious goal. We've set up a goal to become net zero carbon by 2040, no matter what. in particular through the transformation of our own network and information systems, which today account for more than 80% of our energy consumption. So I think it's quite important to say we were focused on this research on how 5G can enable use cases in every single industry that will bring benefit to tackle this challenge. And apart from that, ourselves, we've set up a goal as a telecommunication service provider to become net zero carbon by 2040, which is a bit further from 2030, but it's an ambitious goal compared to where we are today. So I just wanted to mention that. Then I think maybe one thing to highlight from what you said, Mike, which I think is quite interesting, is for the first time for many technologies, blue collars have not been very impacted. And on that one, we can see that some of the jobs will change. And we right now are doing work with Schneider Electric, and we can see that there are new jobs enabled by 5G. We call them augmented operator. That is really fundamentally changing, blue collar. So I think there is, this belief, which is not only a belief, but we can see that there are pockets which is happening already, that 5G will help create new jobs in qualified technical position, a bit different from, the traditional blue collar. And I think it's quite interesting to highlight it. But coming up to what I've said in my introduction, and you can see on that page, what we say at Orange is the most innovative thing about 5G is what we will do with it. It's not something that, we want to take for granted. So all of this research and study, and thank you again, Mike and OMDIA, show that, if you project, there is a goal, there is something that is, enabled by 5G, and, with three main impacts: economic, value, job, and also greenhouse emission. But it's not an easy one to tackle. Absolutely, we know this. 72% of companies actually believe and say that they expect service provider to help them, to support them regarding 5G, to test, to understand, to prototype, to develop ahead of time. And so what we've come up with is, and I'm here in one of them in Paris, we've come up with an opportunity for any company, whether it's a small, medium-sized, a startup, or a large company. And we offer for free our services. I work for innovation. I don't work for, only the commercial side. And so we are offering, in our labs, expertise, services. So you can come and talk to us, roll up your sleeves, and think about what 5G can do for you. And that's really fundamentally what this claim means. It means that it's not something that you need to take for granted. It's not because service provider will roll out 5G that magic will happen. It needs a long, again, and let's be honest, it needs a lot of groundwork, case by case, industry by industry, understanding how you can realize and unlock the value that is there for us together as a company, but also as a society to take. And that's what I wanted to highlight tonight. So I will not give you thorough examples, even through this year, which has been quite difficult, with COVID, etc. As you all know, we've been able to support 40 different small, medium-sized enterprises coming into our labs and, understanding how 5G can enable them to be either more productive, more efficient, or drive new, type of products and objects in their own market. 5G Labs, it's 10 sites in 2021, some of them in France and some of them in Europe. We have one in Romania. We've just opened one in Belgium last week. There is a website, obviously, and the QR code. If you want to go through the QR code, you'll go and you'll be directed to the website. So, and you will find a lot of examples. So for us, the call to action is obviously we are a service provider, okay, but it's a lot more than this. I think this research shows that it's industry by industry, almost inch by inch, that we'll need to do the job. And to do that, this is an initiative. I'm sure in your own markets where you are, there are many others, or there might be others, but we're ready to welcome, and we're ready that together we think that we can unlock the value, which is why, again, if there's something that you can remember is the most innovative thing about 5G is what we will do with it. And I truly, profoundly believe this as a potential for us to do together. So with that, thank you for your attention. I think we might have time, Mike, for a few questions that are coming from the audience.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. Karine, and thank you very much to the audience members for submitting questions. We'll get to as many as we can. Let's see. Karine, I think this is one for you. Have you seen any early impacts from 5G, in the markets where you've already launched services?
Yeah. Yes, yes. On that one, so we've rolled out 5G in most of our countries in Europe, where we had spectrum. The first one is what I've mentioned at the beginning. So let me reiterate it. The 5G consumers, because mainly consumers that are taking a smartphone, 90% of them said that we are meeting or exceeding their expectation. They're quite satisfied with, faster internet on the go. And I truly believe, because, we've launched 3G and 4G, that expectation grow with usage. And even if right now we're thinking, well, maybe we don't need a faster internet, well, I bet that once you get used to your fast internet, yes, it's becoming a problem when you don't have it anymore. I was crossing the border last week and moving from 5G to 4G, I could see an impact, to be honest, roaming on a 4G network from a 5G, just because I got used to it and not because I work for Orange. I can tell you that my teenagers, children, are getting used to it as well, because I have a 5G phone. So apart from that, from the B2B perspective, we see that there will be tremendous value. It's fair to say that we are still in the moment of testing, prototyping. When you have one factory, one plant that is running on 5G, there is, you need to prove the case before you can invest and scale it up. So we have the port of Antwerp. We have, a plant at Schneider. We have other examples in Romania with the trucks. But for the moment, we can't really say that, we can claim a massive impact. That test and learn takes time. And because we've rolled out 5G only 2021, it will take a bit more time to have a massive impact. But we truly believe that we need to do it case by case. And that's what we are currently doing with different industries.
Great. Very, very interesting. So another question from the audience. Thank you for the questions again. How do you define 5G-enabled sales? And Karine, I think I could take that one. I mean, it's a really good question because it's central to research, but it's 5G-enabled sales is the gross output or total sales across all industries that we see being enabled by 5G. And I think the key there is enabled. And then when we look at each use case in each industry, we ask the question, will 5G enable an increase in sales in that industry, in that country? If so, is 5G one of the core components enabling that increased sales? And in other words, there could be other technologies enabling that use case. And, that is essentially how we define 5G enabled sales. It's not direct sales of sort of 5G smartphones. It does include that, but it's also, for example, if you use your smartphone, to do mobile banking, and, the bank maybe earns a little bit of money by that through your increased business, those sales would also be included. So it's both direct and indirect sales enabled by 5G. I hope that helps with that question. Let's see if we could get to some more questions. Hold on a second. Let me just see. Karine, I know Orange is has operations in many countries, but this is a question about deployment. How long do you think it will take 5G to come to countries in Africa like Kenya? Obviously, when 5G is deployed will be a big part of when it starts to have an impact. What's your view there?
Well, I think so. Well, first of all, it's only my view, and it's not, and it's keep moving. A year ago, I would probably not have answered what I'm going to answer right now. it's fair to say that we are starting right now. Orange is quite present in Middle East Africa countries, and a year ago, no one would really, think about 5G. And right now, as we speak, we are currently, working with Middle East Africa countries that are part of Orange Group on workshopping, the roadmap. So it's fair to say that, things are moving quite fast, and it's probably sooner than we would have expected a year ago. And it might be only, in dense urban areas. I repeat that 5G is a more efficient network. And when you have, the spectrum that is needed, you also can relieve the usage growth that you can see in urban and dense areas. So if the usage is growing so much that, you need to move into the next technology, Africa and any other country would consider if it's a benefit, if it has a benefit for them in terms of just doing our job, which is servicing our customer that need to communicate. So I think, watch out, because it might be commerce sooner than later in those zones.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that, Corinne. Another question here. Corinne, I'll see if you have a view on this, and I'll be happy to provide a view as well. How specifically will 5G help to avoid greenhouse gas emissions, including CO2? Do you want to have a stab at that first? Or do you want me to go first, Corinne? What's your preference? Okay. So,
I think you can go first, Mike, and then I add. Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting that when you think about 5G reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it can be helpful to actually start with, where we are today, say 5G smartphones, or even think of, 4G smartphones, which by the time of this study in 2030, will all be 5G smartphones. A simple example that hopefully helps to illustrate the methodology of, looking at broader impacts of a technology is if I use my smartphone. I mentioned before mobile banking. I used to drive to the bank to deposit a check. Now I have an app on my phone, and I take a picture of the check and deposit it, electronically. It's a simple example, but that is an example of how greenhouse gas emissions are reduced by the simple fact that I don't get into my car and make a trip. Instead, I use my smartphone for that service. And if you think about multiplying that across, all the different applications we use, mobile shopping, and so on, and then extending that to enterprise use cases, smart manufacturing, how can you use 5G and other technologies, to make the flow of goods and services throughout a factory more efficient. The less those goods are moving, the fewer forklift trips you have in your warehouse, the more you reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's the methodology. That's the view we had to take on each use case and its potential impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in these countries in 2030. Corinne?
Yeah, no, I think, basically, well, when you read the research, you will find lots of other examples that we believe can help in that direction, which is how we made the calculation, because it's a sum of all the different use cases that we've come up with. And I think, again, we'll have to take one by one, proof it, and then rolling out with the industry that, are willing to test this with us. And obviously, what I want to add as well is the network by this.
We lost your audio, Corinne. Sorry.
Sorry, I was on mute. Which I think by design will obviously have an impact on the greenhouse emission. It's something that maybe, sometimes we forget, but I think it's important to remind ourselves about that. It's more secure by design, it's more efficient by design as well.
Interesting. So if we have time, I'd like to try and squeeze in one more question. I think we've got about a minute. So, Corinne, another interesting question, and apologies we haven't been able to get to all of these, but what will be the most significant potential breaks that could limit the achievement of 5G in these areas as we forecasted? Karina, I think that's a good one for you to start with.
Sure. Well, one of the main driver of adoption is obviously having coverage to serve all of these use cases at a decent cost. So it could be, we know that this year everything is on, has been on the rise in terms of price. So, it's something that obviously it's important. The price of the smartphone. So one of the key driver for, adoption is, when we talk about augmented operator in a plant or it might need, VR headset. And to have that, obviously, to have this at a scale, we need to have this headset at a lower cost. So I think for me, it's a maturity question of all the drivers that have that we need together to make this happen, and we are a lot dependent on those headsets, those smartphones, and the all equipment and the rollout of all of these 5G networks everywhere. So I think that will be one of the key, driver for maybe slowing adoption or a faster adoption, depending on those price, whether or not it will come down more rapidly than on our projections or less rapidly than in our projection.
Great. Karine, thank you so much. And I saw a question that I can answer very quickly. Is this study available to the public? Yes, Orange has made this available to the public. So you can go to the Orange site or to the webinar site. We should have a link available for you. I will now just like to say thank you so much for your attendance and participation in today's webinar, for submitting your questions and comments. Thank you so much to Karine as well for your remarks and expertise. Thank you to Orange for sponsoring the webinar and commissioning the 5G impact research and moving the industry forward on 5G. An archived version of this webinar will be available shortly. A short survey will appear at the conclusion of the webinar. Please take a few moments to fill that out. Please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And again, thank you so much for attending and for your contributions. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Mike. Thank you to the audience.